Stay tuned for the following shows on the SAP Network.
Okay, children, gather round. Deep within this forest, there resides a top-secret government facility managed by a woman with mirrors for eyes. She sucks little children into black cubes with the help of her evil extraterrestrial associates. Within these cubes, the children are forced to watch safety education videos, a government conspiracy to make the future a safer place to live. So be careful, children. Be careful in this forest. Be careful of the cube.
You're about to hear some of true life experiences and investigations regarding fatalities and injuries involving tobacco smoke in the workplace. We will not be showing any graphic pictures. However, we will be reviewing some common simple mistakes that have changed the lives of employees and those around them. The following experiences were not caused by tobacco smoke in the office. However, smoking was the leading factor that caused the devastation to the lives of the employees and their families as well, all because of just one little spark. July 2011, an employee was working the night shift at a disposal facility. Specifically, the facility specializes in the disposal of salt water that is contaminated with field oil waste. The water would usually be separated from the oil and petroleum-based materials in a settling tank. During the employee's shift, he was monitoring 2 collection tanks that were connected to a separation drum tank. After receiving a water delivery from a full tanker truck, the employee accessed the catwalk to gauge the water level. Soon after reaching the tank area, an explosion occurred. The truck driver who was leaving the facility observed the explosion and following fireball in his rear view mirror. The driver immediately stopped his truck and contacted emergency services. Despite the fire spreading to both tanks, the employee was able to escape the fire. However, his clothes were completely burned off and over 90% of his body was burned. The employee collapsed on the front porch area of the facility office, where emergency personnel a short time later began treatment. The employee was taken by helicopter to the hospital, where he died. The accident investigation revealed that the employee had a history of smoking near the storage tanks and had been warned by the employer to stop several times. Due to his history and the discovery of the lighter found under the catwalk, it was suspected that the employee inadvertently caused the explosion and fire. January 2011, a co-owner of a company was using a 5-gallon tote of gasoline to prepare to burn wooden pallets. There were no witnesses. It was believed that while he prepared to use the gas, he was smoking. A spark then fell onto the gasoline, which ignited an instantaneous flash fire. The co-owner was burned on 97% of his body and died later the same day. Texas, December 2006. An employee was working for a contractor that had been contracted to remodel a local restaurant. He was inside of a walk-in metal storage container that was located in a parking area behind the restaurant, which was being remodeled. He was cleaning paint spraying equipment with lacquer thinner. As the employee exited the container for a smoking break, he struck his lighter, causing the flammable solvent vapors inside the storage container to ignite, and his clothes caught fire. He was transported to the regional medical center, where he was hospitalized and treated for first and second-degree burns and smoke inhalation. Oregon, June 2004. A loading dock worker was looking at a semi-trailer load of expandable polystyrene beads when he noticed something out of the ordinary. The employee approached the load to examine the bulkhead while smoking a cigarette. The cigarette ignited the pentane gases that were gassing off from the load. The employee was blown away from the load into a parked forklift mast. The employee sustained multiple fractures of the lower leg and burns on his face and neck. The employee was hospitalized due to his injuries. Alright, first things first. This is not one of those listen if you smoke you're gonna die videos. This is more of one of those listen if you smoke, be responsible and smoke in the designated smoking area. Thank you for taking the time to assist your employer in improving safety in your workplace. Thank you and be safe.
What you need to learn today is that we'll be talking about all the
Honest gossip, la 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 la. Honest gossip. Honest gossip, la 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 la. La 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 la.
Shh. Forest gossip.
Trees, guess what I just heard from the owl? Have you ever heard of drought?
What's it to you? I've heard of a lot of things.
Man, what's a drought anyway? Is that German, dude?
Drought is when it doesn't rain much in a certain region and you get prolonged shortages of water supply. It can last for years, but it's considered a drought just after 15 days.
I'm not worried. My roots go deep to tap lots of moisture underground.
Yeah, and luckily, we live in the Northwest, dude, where we don't get much of this drought you talk about. But what happens if we do get a drought?
Well, when there's a drought, vegetation dries out, increasing the number of brush fires. Animals then need to migrate to find water and food.
Hey now, I couldn't care less about animals, but brush fires are things I take very seriously.
Me too, dude, because, we are vegetation. And if there's a drought, dude, we die. So how can these droughts happen?
Well, human activity can directly trigger droughts. Things like farming, excessive irrigation, deforestation, and erosion can impact the ability of the land to capture and hold water. In some parts of the world, distinct dry and wet seasons can happen, greatly increasing the drought during the dry seasons.
Stupid humans can't leave well enough alone. One of these days, us trees have got to get together and do something about those pests.
Totally, dude. But Bunny, what can I do as a tree if there's a drought?
Well, adapting to a drought is a common thing, Happy. Some plants, such as cacti, adapt to survive by reducing leaf area and developing waxy cuticles to enhance their ability to tolerate droughts.
Well, dude, that's no help. I'm a tree, not a cacti.
Some others survive as buried seeds. The longest drought ever recorded was in Chile, and that lasted 400 years.
400 years? That's crazy! But I could handle it. I'm a tough tree. Just keep those brush fires away from me.
All this talk has made me really thirsty. I think I'll go get some water. Bye, guys.
Are you thirsty? Do you feel tired? Is your heart rate elevated when you aren't active? Are you having trouble producing urine, or is your urine a dark yellow or orange color? Is your skin dry? If so, you may be suffering from dehydration. Dehydration is the condition where your body is losing fluids more quickly than it is gaining or retaining them. Our patent-pending Miracle HHO hydration fluid will rehydrate and reinvigorate your body. Used for years as an industrial solvent, dihydrogen monoxide is a proven, safe, and effective hydrator for human consumption, blasting away feelings of dry mouth, tiredness, dizziness, and dryness. Our scientists combine 2 hydrogen molecules with 1 oxygen molecule to create a chemical compound that is perfect for lubricating your blood and joints, which promotes the flow of oxygen to the muscles and brain, allowing you to work and think more efficiently. Sure, other drinks and foods such as fruits and vegetables contribute a significant amount to your body's hydration, but nothing is more simple and effective at warding off the effects of dehydration as HHO hydration fluid. HHO hydration fluid may even reduce constipation and have fewer negative side effects than other drinks. Working outside in summer heat or hot environments can really take it out of you. Replenish your bodily fluids with HHO hydration fluid and avoid heat stress or heat stroke. Using HHO hydration fluid is easy. Simply drink some whenever you feel thirsty, when you are working up a sweat, or when losing fluid from being sick. How much would you expect to pay for this premium hydration fluid? $1,200? $90? $18? Well, for 3 easy payments of $0, you can get not 1, not 2, but 3 glasses of HHO hydration fluid. But wait, there's more! If you order within the next 15 seconds, you can get a 4th glass absolutely free! What are you waiting for? Order your set of HHO hydration fluid today.
Nearly any drink can have a hydrating effect on the body. Many foods, especially fruits and vegetables, contain a significant amount of liquid that contributes to your overall hydration. It is possible to consume too much water, so some experts recommend using your own sense of thirst to determine when and how much you should drink. Confusion and weakness are signs of severe dehydration and are indicators that you should seek medical attention.
Read this!
Hello and welcome. In this module, we will be reviewing the basic requirements of first aid. First off, we want to introduce you to the idea that there are vertical standards as well as horizontal standards when reviewing codes. For example, the ordinary basics of first aid will cover all industries. That is a horizontal standard. The vertical standard is a code that only applies to a specific type of industry. For example, construction. It abides by the horizontal standards of the basics. However, there are some areas that have stricter guidelines that only pertain to the construction industry. You may find these standards on OSHA's website, osha.gov. In addition, because some states are stricter than others with regards to safety, you should also refer to the standards set forth by your state, which may administer an OSHA-approved occupational safety and health plan. Some states' general industry and construction first aid standards are the same as those of federal OSHA. However, your state may interpret its first aid standards more stringently than federal OSHA interprets its standards. Thus, we recommend that you also contact your state's agency. Your employer must make sure first aid supplies are readily available. First aid supplies at your workplace must be appropriate to your occupational setting and the response time of your emergency medical services. Just as accident prevention programs are tailored to a business, first aid kits should be tailored to the worksite. When your employer is doing the analysis of the types of hazards existing on the worksite, they should try to visualize the types of injuries that may occur. They may not need more than the basic first aid kit. However, your employer should also try to visualize other potential sources of injuries based on the type of equipment and chemicals used in the work environment. For instance, in an office environment, an employer may think that a paper cut is all they need to worry about. However, sometimes they need to look beyond the obvious. For instance, are the employees required to work with household cleaners? If they are, there's always the possibility of some of the cleaner splashing into the employee's eyes. The emergency eye wash station doesn't seem as far-fetched now, does it? When would you ever need burn ointment in an office setting? Your employer may say the only equipment that their employees use is a copy machine. Well, do the employees ever have to clear jams in that copy machine? The heating elements in a copy machine can get hot enough to cause burn injuries. Also, their office may have a coffee maker or a hot beverage vending machine where employees could get scalded. Oh, and let us not forget the type of weather the employees are exposed to, as that will also create certain hazards. The bottom line is that your employer must look at their worksite in the worst case scenario. Remember Murphy's Law when making an assessment. Whatever can go wrong, will go wrong. On an important note, first aid kits from your local retailer or safety supplier should be adequate for most non-industrial employers. Your employer will still want to check to be on the safe side. Make sure your employer's first aid supplies are easily accessible to all employees. The kit should be stored in containers that protect them from damage, deterioration, or contamination. Containers must be clearly marked, not locked, and may be sealed. It also must be able to be moved to the location of an injured or acutely ill employee. Providing first aid assistance and first aid supplies can help reduce the severity of an injury to reduce the cost of medical bills and the length of time an employee is unable to work. Training for first aid is offered by the American Heart Association, the American Red Cross, the National Safety Council, and other nationally recognized and private educational organizations. First aid courses should be individualized to the needs of the workplace. Some of the noted program elements may be optional for a particular plant or facility. On the other hand, unique conditions at a specific worksite may necessitate the addition of customized elements to a first aid training program. Emergency washing facilities or equipment, eye washes or emergency showers, are considered a form of first aid. Emergency eye washes are required where there is potential for worker eye exposure to corrosives, strong irritants, or toxic chemicals. If major portions of a worker's body would be exposed to these substances, an emergency shower is required. One important item to remember: if emergency washing facilities are needed, they must be located within 10 seconds travel time or less than 50 feet from the worker. Emergency washing equipment is required if employees are exposed to the following types of chemicals. Corrosives. They destroy living tissue. This includes acids and caustics. Includes chemicals with pH less than 2.5 or more than 11. Strong irritants. Strong irritants cause an inflammatory effect at the point of contact. Toxic chemicals are absorbed through the skin and cause ill health effects. Includes pesticides. All logging employees except truck drivers must have first aid training. The reason log truck drivers are not required to receive first aid and CPR training is they are not involved with falling, yarding, loading, or processing. If they are involved in these processes, then a first aid card and CPR training is a must. Each employee's first aid and CPR training and/or certificate of training must be current. At least 2 persons holding a valid certificate of first aid training must be present or available at all times in sorting yard operations. The employer must provide first aid kits at each worksite where trees are being cut, at each active landing or logging site, and in all transport vehicles, log trucks, speeders, and road graders used where there is an absence of readily accessible first aid supplies, first aid stations, and first aid rooms or their equivalent. Such vehicles and equipment must be equipped with not less than a 10-package first aid kit, and the number of first aid kits and the content of each kit must reflect the degree of isolation, the number of employees, and the hazards reasonably anticipated at the worksite. Following is the minimally acceptable number and type of required first aid supplies to meet the requirements of this section. The contents of the first aid kit listed should be adequate for a small worksite of 2 to 3 employees. For larger or multiple logging operations conducted at the same location, the employer should provide additional first aid kits or additional quantities of supplies in the first aid kits. Transport vehicles, log trucks, speeders, and road graders must have at least the following number and types of first aid supplies. When 6 or more employees are generally being transported on any one trip, the first aid kit must be increased in size. The employer must maintain the contents of each first aid kit in a serviceable condition. Each employee, including supervisors, must receive or have received first aid and CPR training. New employees not holding a valid first aid card must be trained within a reasonable time, not to exceed 6 months from hiring. Now let's take a look at first aid requirements regarding construction, another vertical standard. Each employer must have available at all work sites where a crew is present a person or persons holding a valid first aid certificate. All crew leaders, supervisors, or persons in direct charge of 1 or more employees must have a valid first aid certificate. For the purpose of this section, a crew means a group of 2 or more employees working at any work site. On a very important note, the requirement that all crew leaders, supervisors, or persons in direct charge of 1 or more employees applies even if other first aid trained persons are available. In emergencies, crew leaders will be permitted to work up to 30 days without having the required certificate, providing an employee in the crew or another crew leader in the immediate work area has the necessary certificate. All vehicles used to transport work crews must be equipped with first aid supplies. When practical, a poster must be fastened and maintained either on or in the cover of each first aid kit and at or near all phones plainly stating the worksite address or location and the phone numbers of the emergency medical responders for the worksite. Be aware that the same requirements are still in effect for emergency wash stations as indicated previously for this industry. First aid kits in vehicles or at company facilities must be placed in locations where they will be readily available when needed. 1910.151 Appendix A provides guidance on the first aid kit contents and how to assess the needs of the workplace, including exposure to blood-borne pathogens. Additionally, the contents of the first aid kit shall be placed in a weatherproof container with individual sealed packages for each type of item, and shall be checked by the employer before being sent out on each job and at least weekly on each job to ensure that the expended items are replaced. While the standard does not specifically cover documenting the results of the first aid kit inspections, some companies have initiated inspection documentation procedures in which staff inspect the contents of first aid kits at regular intervals and enter the inspection date and inspector's initials on an inspection tag inside the kit. Proper equipment for prompt transportation of the injured person to a physician or hospital, or a communication system for contacting necessary ambulance service shall be provided. Your company's first aid program should be reviewed periodically to determine if it continues to address the needs of the specific workplace. Training, supplies, equipment, and first aid policies should be added or modified to account for changes in workplace safety and health hazards, worksite locations, and worker schedules since the last program review. The first aid training program should be kept up to date with current first aid techniques and knowledge. Outdated training and reference materials should be replaced or removed. Well, that's that. We covered the basic first aid requirements and also discussed the differences between a horizontal standard and a vertical standard. Thank you for your interest in occupational safety and health. We hope you find this information helpful. Thank you, and be safe.
Being around nature can be very exciting, but when you get a cut and you forget your first aid kit, that excitement can turn into panic when you realize that your wound now hurts because it's starting to develop an infection. How do you care for it? The first step is to clean your cut. A saline solution, potable water, soapy water, or a stream are good ways to wash off any debris from the wound. If no other safe clean liquid is available, then urine can be used, but only in extreme situations because although urine is mostly water, it could make things worse later. If at this point you are still bleeding, you will need to make it stop. Using cloth or absorbent pads such as cotton balls, secure it above the cut. Applying pressure to the wound is an effective way to stop the bleeding. Do not use a tourniquet unless there is a large amount of blood loss, as tourniquets can cause complications and even result in amputation. The next step is to cover your wound with some sort of bandages. A covered wound will heal faster because it stays protected and clean. Make sure it isn't too tight, as some ventilation will help the healing. Remember to change the bandages every day or as soon as it gets too dirty or soaked. At some point, scabbing may occur. That's a good indication that your wound is on its way of healing properly. Scarring may occur as well. However, if the cut is too big or the bandage can't stop the bleeding, you may need to find your way to the hospital as soon as possible. So stay prepared, and thank you for watching.
The American Red Cross was founded on May 21, 1881 by Clarissa Harlow Barton, or Clara as she liked to be called. In 1861, Clara was working as a recording clerk in the U.S. Patent Office in Washington, D.C. The Civil War was just beginning, and as troops began arriving in the city, Clara was quick to realize that they needed the basic necessities such as clothing, food, shelter, and care for the wounded. She recognized many of the soldiers as she had grown up with them or had taught them in school in her earlier years. With other local women from the Ladies' Aid Society, they were able to provide food, clothing, and supplies that they desperately needed. She urged the community for donations and set up a system to distribute the items in need. Clara was finally given approval to attend to the wounded on the battlefield and field hospitals. She earned the nickname Angel of the Battlefield following the Battle of Cedar Mountain in Northern Virginia in August 1862, when she arrived at the field hospital at midnight with a wagon loaded with supplies. Not only did she tirelessly attend to the wounded and those in need, she found herself also serving to the families of the deceased. She saw a need for families to be able to locate missing loved ones and establish the Office of the Correspondence with Friends of the Missing Men of the United States Army. Along with her assistants, they answered over 63,000 letters and identified over 22,000 missing men. Even today, that movement remains as one of Red Cross's most valuable services. After the end of the Civil War, Clara visited Europe in 1869. While there, she became aware of the services of the Red Cross in Geneva, Switzerland. She also read a book written by Henry Dunant, founder of the Global Red Cross Network. Henry's mission was to have an international agreement in place to care for the sick and wounded during wartime through a volunteer network. His ideas took a foothold, and in 1864, a treaty was signed by 12 European nations in 1864 in Geneva. While still in Europe in 1870, Clara was called into service with the International Red Cross during the outbreak of the Franco-Prussian War. Clara was able to help dispense relief supplies and also coordinated workrooms so that citizens of Strasbourg could make clothing. After Clara's return from Europe and fresh from her experiences with the International Red Cross, she started working on gaining the U.S. government's recognition of the International Committee of the Red Cross. She began work in 1873 and finally in 1878 was able to meet with President Rutherford. His opinion was that the U.S. wouldn't be of need of that service again and rejected the treaty. It wasn't until 1882 that Clara was able to convince President Chester Arthur that the American Red Cross could also respond to other emergencies other than war, such as earthquakes, fires, and hurricanes. Finally, President Arthur signed the treaty, which was ratified by the Senate a few days later. Clara became the president, and the first meeting was held on May 21, 1881. For the first 20 years, the American Red Cross was largely devoted to disaster relief, such as the Ohio River flood, famine in Texas, tornado in Illinois, and yellow fever epidemic in Florida, to name a few. During the Spanish-American War, the American Red Cross delivered supplies and services to Cuba, which would become the first time that American armed forces and civilians were assisted during wartime. Clara Barton retired from the American Red Cross in 1904 at the age of 83. Even in retirement, she continued her humanitarian work and even established the National First Aid Society, for which she served 5 years as the honorary president. Although small and short-lived, this organization focused on basic first aid, emergency preparedness, and developing first aid kits. Clara also wrote several books and her own autobiography in 1907. On April 12, 1912, at the age of 90, Clara passed away in her home in Glen Echo, Maryland. Throughout her life, Clara's passion for education, women's rights, and services to others helped thousands in need and led to the modern-day American Red Cross, which continues to provide services today that Clara envisioned from the beginning.
You've had a bad day and nothing's going right. You've had a bad day. You'll be glad for bed until the morning light, when it starts again, the 9 to 5 mundane. You can't wait for the end. You've had a bad day.
Fire, one of the most beautiful and deadliest forces known to man. According to the National Fire Protection Association, in 2013 alone, U.S. fire departments responded to an estimated 1,240,000 fires. These fires resulted in 3,240 civilian fire fatalities, 15,925 civilian fire injuries, and an estimated $11.5 billion in direct property loss. There was a civilian fire death every 2 hours and 42 minutes and a civilian fire injury every 33 minutes in 2013. Home fires caused 2,755, or about 85% of the civilian fire deaths. Fires accounted for 4% of the 31,644,500 total calls. 7% of the calls were false alarms. 68% of the calls were for aids such as emergency medical services. Now let's go back in time to discover a fire prevention plan. No, go further back in time. Still further, way further. Just keep going all the way. Yeah, just keep going. Just keep. Okay. No, that's probably good right there. Okay, stop. Good. Right there. In this module, workers will be represented with these guys. A fire truck or non-portable fire extinguisher will be represented by this guy. A portable fire extinguisher will be represented by this guy. The human body has a built-in warning system to alert us of fires by feeling the temperature in our skin. What we don't have built in is a fire prevention plan. The purpose of a fire prevention plan is to prevent a fire from occurring in your workplace. It describes the fuel sources on site that could initiate or contribute both to the spread of fire as well as the building systems, such as fixed fire extinguisher systems and alarm systems, in place to control the ignition or spread of a fire. Your workplace can provide its fire prevention plan to your local fire department as an additional source of information they may need when assisting your facility during an emergency. Do you know what the fire prevention plan is in your workplace? Do you know what is required in the fire prevention plan? A fire prevention plan must be in writing, be kept in the workplace, and be made available to employees for review. However, an employer with 10 or fewer employees may communicate the plan orally to employees. Be sure to check with your local regulation and guidelines, as the codes may be more strict than what OSHA requires. Your fire prevention plan should include at minimum a list of all major fire hazards, proper handling and storage procedures for hazardous materials, potential ignition sources and their control, and the type of fire protection equipment necessary to control each major hazard. Procedures to control accumulation of flammable and combustibles waste materials. Procedures for regular maintenance of safeguards installed on heat-producing equipment to prevent accidental ignition of combustible materials. The name or job titles of employees responsible for maintaining equipment to prevent or control sources of ignition of fires. And the name or job titles of employees responsible for the control of fuel source hazards. Your employer must inform employees upon initial assignment to a job of the fire hazards to which they are exposed. They must also review with each employee those parts of the fire prevention plan necessary for self-protection. Workplace fires and explosions kill and injure thousands of workers each year. One way to limit the amount of damage due to such fires is to make portable fire extinguishers an important part of your fire prevention program. When used properly, fire extinguishers can save lives and property by putting out a small fire or controlling a fire until additional help arrives, as you've heard in the previous incident. A fire is the most common type of emergency for which small businesses must plan. A critical decision when planning is whether or not employees should fight a small fire with a portable fire extinguisher or simply evacuate. Should employees evacuate or be prepared to fight a small fire? You may think, just run out of there as fast as you can. That's my plan. Small fires can often be put out quickly by a well-trained employee with a portable fire extinguisher. However, to do this safely, the employee must understand the use and limitations of a portable fire extinguishers and the hazards associated with fighting fires. Evacuation plans that designate or require some or all of the employees to fight fires with a portable fire extinguisher increase the level of complexity of the plan and the level of training that must be provided to the employees. Choosing whether to evacuate the workplace rather than providing fire extinguishers for employee use in fighting fires will most effectively minimize the potential for fire-related injuries to employees. Training employees to use fire extinguishers and maintaining them requires considerable resources. Other factors such as the availability of a public fire department or the vulnerability of egress routes will enter into this decision. So let's review some options and its requirements. Option A. Total evacuation of employee from the workplace immediately when alarm sounds. This means no one is authorized to use available portable fire extinguishers. It requires your workplace to establish an emergency action plan, fire prevention plan, and train the employees accordingly. Extinguishers are not existing and not required. Option B. Designated employees are authorized to use portable fire extinguishers to fight fires. All other employees must evacuate workplace immediately when alarm sounds. It requires your workplace to establish an emergency action plan and train employees accordingly. Meet all general fire extinguishers requirement plus annually train designated employees to use fire extinguishers. Fire extinguishers in the workplace must be inspected, tested, and maintained on an annual basis. Option C. All employees are authorized to use portable fire extinguishers to fight fires. It requires that if any employee will be evacuating, your workplace needs to establish an emergency action plan and train employees accordingly. It must also meet all general fire extinguishers requirement plus annually train all employees to use the fire extinguishers. Fire extinguishers in the workplace must be inspected, tested, and maintained. Option D. Fire extinguishers are provided but not intended for employee use. It requires your workplace to establish an emergency action plan, fire prevention plan, and train employees accordingly. If fire extinguishers are left in the workplace, they must be inspected, tested, and maintained. Extinguishers are provided but not for employee use. Be aware that all fire extinguishers are to be inspected by the GM or the safety committee. They will check the gauge, seal, and hose. To find out when a fire extinguisher was last inspected, be sure to check the initials and date on the back of the tag. A very important factor is risk assessment. Portable fire extinguishers have two functions: to control or extinguish small or incipient stage fire, and to protect evacuation routes that a fire may block directly or indirectly with smoke or burning materials. To extinguish a fire with a portable extinguisher, a person must have immediate access to the extinguisher. They must know how to actuate the unit and know how to apply the agent effectively. Attempting to extinguish even in small fires carries some risks. Fires can increase in size and intensity in seconds, blocking the exit path of the firefighter and creating a hazardous atmosphere. In addition, portable fire extinguishers contain a limited amount of extinguishing agent and can be discharged in a matter of seconds. Therefore, individuals should attempt to fight only very small or incipient stage fires. Prior to fighting any fire with a portable fire extinguisher, you must perform a risk assessment that evaluates the fire size, the firefighter's evacuation path, and the atmosphere in the vicinity of the fire. There are a few questions to ask when trying to figure out if using a fire extinguisher is the best idea at that moment. Is the fire too big? If the fire is limited to the original material ignited, it is contained such as in a wastebasket, and it has not spread to other materials and the flames are no higher than the firefighter's head, then the use of a portable fire extinguisher is recommended. If the fire involves flammable solvents, has spread over more than 60 square feet, is partially hidden behind a wall or ceiling, or cannot be reached from a standing position, then the use of a portable fire extinguisher is not recommended. Is the air safe to breathe? If the fire has not depleted the oxygen in the room and is producing only small quantities of toxic gases and no respiratory protection equipment is required, then the use of a portable fire extinguisher is recommended. If due to smoke and products of combustion the fire cannot be fought without respiratory protection, then the use of a portable fire extinguisher is not recommended. Is the environment too hot or smoky? If heat is being generated but the room temperature is slightly increased, smoke may be accumulating on the ceiling, but visibility is good and no special protection equipment is required, then the use of a portable fire extinguisher is recommended. If the radiated heat is easily felt on exposed skin, making it difficult to approach within 10 to 15 feet of the fire, or the effective range of the extinguisher, if one must crawl on the floor due to heat or smoke, and smoke is quickly filling the room, decreasing visibility, then the use of a portable fire extinguisher is not recommended. Is there a safe evacuation path? If there is a clear evacuation path that is behind you as you fight the fire, then the use of a portable fire extinguisher is recommended. If the fire is not contained, and fire, heat, or smoke may block the evacuation path, then the use of a portable fire extinguisher is not recommended. I'm sure at this point you have a much better idea of when it is recommended to use a fire extinguisher, but how much do you know about fire? Fire is a very rapid chemical reaction between oxygen and a combustible material which results in the release of heat, light, flames, and smoke. For fire to exist, the following 4 elements must be present at the same time. Enough oxygen to sustain combustion, enough heat to raise the material to its ignition temperature, some sort of fuel or combustible material, and the chemical reaction that is fire. Take any of these 4 things away and you will not have a fire, or the fire will be extinguished. We all breathe oxygen, and without it we would suffocate. But did you know that fire breathes oxygen too? And like us, without oxygen, a fire will suffocate. All fire extinguishers must be approved by a national recognized testing laboratory to verify compliance with the applicable standards. Equipment that passes the laboratory's test are labeled and given an alphanumeric classification based on the type and size of the fire it will extinguish. A label for classification may look like this. The letters A, B, and C represent the types of fire for which the extinguisher has been approved. The number in front of the A rating indicates how much water the extinguisher is equal to and represents 1.5 gallons of water for every unit. For example, a 3-A rated extinguisher would be equal to 3 times 1.5 gallons of water. The number in front of the B rating represents the area in square feet of a Class B fire that a non-expert user should be able to extinguish. Using the above example, a non-expert should be able to put out a flammable liquid fire that is as large as 40 square feet. But do you know how to work a fire extinguisher? What if a fire started right now? Would you be able to find the fire extinguisher in your workplace? Would you be able to use it safely and promptly to help stop or reduce the fire in your workplace? If you answered no to any of these questions, we suggest you to take a basic fire extinguisher training. It could save your life and your co-workers' lives as well.
My brain explode!
We hope you found this hour entertaining, informative, and relevant. Thank you for watching, and stay safe.